The 1988 United States Roosevelt dime is one of those small, easy-to-overlook coins that actually carries a surprising amount of history in its tiny frame. Because even though it's only 10 cents, it represents decades of American economic habits, minting technology, and political memory that trace back to the century. The obverse features the familiar portrait of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd U.S. president, whose leadership during the Great Depression and World War II earned him a place on the dime in 1946 after his death, chosen partly because of his connection to the March of Dimes campaign that fought childhood polio. By 1988, the U.S. Mint had been producing the copper-nickel-clad version of the dime for over 2 decades, having switched from a 90% silver composition in 1965 due to the rising cost of precious metals. This newer alloy, outer layers of 75% copper and 25% nickel bonded to a pure copper core, became the standard for everyday coinage and gave the dime its more modern silver gray, but not actually silver, appearance. Your coin's tiny P mint mark indicates it was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, which, after years of not using mint marks on dimes, resumed adding them in 1980. So this 1988 issue is part of the era where Philadelphia was reliably identifiable on circulating coins. In that year, the Mint produced hundreds of millions of dimes, and the 1988 P is considered a regular issue, high-mintage coin commonly found in circulation, which means its face value is still 10 cents, though collectors sometimes look for crisp, uncirculated examples or rare die varieties. Most circulated pieces hold sentimental or historical interest rather than monetary value. The reverse shows the same design introduced in 1946, an olive branch for peace, a torch for liberty, and an oak branch for strength, with United States of America, 1 dime, and E pluribus unum wrapping the motif, symbolizing the post-war American identity that valued unity, resilience, and freedom. Even though millions were made, each dime like yours quietly reflects the era's everyday American life. Payphones still ate these coins, vending machines still preferred them, and daily transactions relied on physical change long before digital payments took over. What really ties it all together is that the 1988 P dime sits at an interesting midpoint in modern U.S. coin history. Past the silver era, past the early copper-nickel experiments, but before the 1990s and 2000s brought dramatic changes like the state quarters program. So it's sort of a steady-state coin, created in a time when the design was stable, the minting process was efficient, and the country didn't feel the need to change the look of its circulating money. So even though it seems like just another small coin, it's a tiny survivor of its time, carrying the legacy of FDR, the modernization of American coinage, and the story of a minting system that quietly keeps the country's everyday commerce running next top 2. The 1981 D United States Roosevelt dime, marked with the Denver Mint's signature, D mint mark, is one of those small but surprisingly story-packed coins that many people handle every day without realizing the layers of history, politics, economics, and national symbolism hiding in just a few grams of metal. This coin continues the long-running Roosevelt dime series, first issued in 1946 as a tribute to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whose leadership during the Great Depression and World War II reshaped the American state, and whose fight against polio inspired the March of Dimes charity. By 1981, America was deep into a new era, an age of inflation battles, Cold War tension, and a nationwide shift in economic policy under President Ronald Reagan. And yet the dime quietly remained unchanged in design, still carrying the familiar profile of Roosevelt on the obverse, created by sculptor John R. Cynic, with his sharp jawline, tightly combed hair, and focused expression meant to convey intellect and determination. Along the coin's front, you see liberty along the left rim, a word chosen not just as a national value, but as a pillar of U.S. identity since its earliest coinage. Just below Roosevelt's chin sits the national motto, "In God We Trust," continuing a tradition solidified on all U.S. coins in the mid-20th century. To the right of the portrait, next to the neckline, is the D mint mark, showing that your coin was produced at the Denver Mint, the West's powerhouse of American coin production. In 1981, Denver struck a huge number of dimes, well over 700 million, because the nation demanded an enormous supply of circulating coins for vending machines, public transportation, retail change, and everyday commerce. The reverse of the 1981 D dime, also designed by Cynic, carries a trio of symbolic images. The central torch, standing tall for freedom and enlightenment, flanked by an olive branch on the left representing peace, and an oak branch on the right symbolizing strength and independence, together forming a visual message of the American ideal that freedom must be balanced with unity and resilience. Around this imagery curves the text United States of America, the denomination 1 dime, and the long-standing motto E pluribus unum, meaning out of many one, a reminder of the country's founding principle that diverse states and people come together as a single nation. Composition-wise, the 1981 D-dime is a clad coin made of 75% copper and 25% nickel on the outer layers with a pure copper core. A design introduced in 1965 after rising silver prices made silver coinage too expensive for circulation. Even though the coin looks silver-colored, it hasn't contained real silver for regular circulation since 1964, and this copper-nickel sandwich gives it durability while keeping costs low. In everyday numismatic terms, the 1981 D-dime is classified as a modern circulation strike, and because of its high mintage, most examples found today hold primarily face value unless they are in exceptional uncirculated or proof-like condition. Collectors, however, still appreciate the 1981 D-dime for its role in the Roosevelt series, especially since the early 1980s represent a transitional moment before minting technology became more consistent. As a result, some subtle varieties and die differences are sought by specialists. While your coin might seem ordinary, it actually sits inside a much larger story, one connecting America's mid-20th century legacy, the evolution of its coinage materials, the symbolism of national ideals, and the practical demands of modern life. Every time you hold a 1981 D-dime, you're essentially holding a tiny, everyday time capsule from a period when the United States was reshaping its economy, redefining global roles, and carrying forward traditions that began decades earlier. These coins survive in enormous numbers because people rarely pay attention to dimes long enough to remove them from circulation, meaning they quietly travel from pocket to pocket, city to city, and generation to generation. And despite being one of the smallest denominations, the dime has historically been a workhorse coin, more durable than pennies, widely used, and symbolically tied to charitable giving because of the March of Dimes. So your 1981 D Roosevelt dime, though common, is part of a grand historical stream, combining artistic heritage, political symbolism, industrial engineering, and the everyday practical reality of money moving through millions of hands. It's the kind of coin that keeps history alive without needing to be rare, valuable, or flashy. It just keeps doing its job, decade after decade, quietly carrying the memory of Roosevelt and the ideals the United States chose to immortalize in its smallest silver-colored coin next top 3. The 1999 P. Roosevelt dime, marked with the iconic 1 dime, Liberty, and the Philadelphia P. Mint mark, sits inside a long American tradition that stretches back to the early days of the nation, but it also reflects the specific era of the late 1990s, a time of economic boom, technological change, and a U.S. mint that was ramping up to produce billions of coins for a rapidly growing economy. Even though a dime might feel small and ordinary, the Roosevelt dime is one of the longest-running U.S. coin designs still in circulation, and the 1999 issue is part of that continuum. First introduced in 1946 to honor President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who led America through the Great Depression and World War II and championed the March of Dimes, which helped fight polio. The dime carries his left-facing portrait on the obverse. On your 1999 P dime, his image is struck using the same portrait originally created by Chief Engraver John R. Sinek, though the details have been modified slightly over the decades as the mint updated its equipment and master hubs. Roosevelt's face, smooth forehead, distinctive hair wave, determined jawline, symbolizes leadership through hardship, and even on a tiny 10-cent piece the design still carries that historical weight. Under Roosevelt's chin sits the word liberty, a reminder of the nation's core ideal, while the motto, "In God We Trust," balances the design on the left, a feature added to almost all U.S. coinage since the 19th century. The date 1999 sits low on the coin, marking the final year of a century filled with world wars, industrial change, and the dawn of the digital age. The P mint mark tells you this coin was minted in Philadelphia, which produced hundreds of millions of dimes that year. Philadelphia was the busiest mint in the country in the late 1990s, supplying the East Coast and many central states with fresh coinage. The reverse of the dime still uses Sinek's classic symbolism, a torch in the center for liberty, flanked by an olive branch for peace on the left and an oak branch for strength on the right. These three together express the American ideal that true freedom stands on both peace and resilience. Around the design you'll find the inscriptions United States of America, the traditional motto E pluribus unum, meaning out of many one, and the denomination 1 dime. Even though dimes have a ridged, reeded edge today, that goes back to the 1700s when ridges prevented dishonest people from shaving silver off the edges of coins. Modern dimes are now copper-nickel clad, not silver, but the pattern stayed as a historic holdover. Your 1999 P dime is made from layers of 75% copper and 25% nickel bonded to a pure copper core, giving it the classic silvery look but without precious metal content. Historically, 1999 sits in the middle of one of the biggest U.S. mint production surges since World War II because the economy was booming, the population was growing, and the convenience store/retail world still ran on cash. That means most 1999 P dimes entered circulation immediately, riding through pockets, vending machines, coffee counters, laundry rooms, and car cup holders for years before collectors ever paid attention to them. In the numismatic world, circulated 1999, P dimes are extremely common and typically worth face value, but high-grade uncirculated examples, especially ones graded MS-67 or MS-68, are prized because flawless mass-production coins from this era are harder to find than people expect. While there aren't major rare errors from 1999, collectors occasionally chase off-center strikes, blank planchets, and cladding errors from this period, because the sheer volume the mint produced made small slip-ups statistically possible. But beyond rarity or dollar value, a 1999 P dime captures a snapshot of the U.S. Mint at the turn of the millennium. A modern, high-precision factory using advanced coining presses to produce coins by the millions per day, yet still relying on the same artistic heritage established in the 1940s when Roosevelt's portrait first appeared. When you hold a dime like this, you're touching a tiny slice of that historical chain. One small circle of metal that carries a president's legacy, the mint's craftsmanship, mid-century symbolism, late-century economic energy, and the enduring practicality of American coinage. Whether it's in your hand as a collectible, a keepsake, or just a cool little artifact of U.S. history, the 1999 P. Roosevelt dime quietly embodies over half a century of design, decades of circulation, and that unique, everyday history feeling that makes even the smallest coin worth appreciating next top 4. The 1914 P. United States 1 dime barber dime, carrying the proud inscription Liberty and struck at the Philadelphia Mint, sits at a fascinating crossroads in American history, both numismatically and culturally, because it emerges from a nation balancing old traditions with the early tremors of modernity. Designed by Chief Engraver Charles E. Barber, whose artistic touch defined an entire generation of U.S. coinage, the Barber dime features the trademark Liberty head on the obverse, a sturdy, Roman-style profile wearing a Phrygian cap and a laurel wreath, intended to reflect strength, stability, and a sense of classical dignity that Americans at the turn of the century strongly admired. The reverse carries the bold wreath encircling the words 1 dime, a wreath composed of agricultural bounty, corn, wheat, maple leaves, oak, and other plants used symbolically to echo the nation's agricultural roots and its ambitions toward prosperity. In 1914, the Philadelphia Mint produced roughly 17.3 million Barber dimes, which means the coin was widely used in the busy pockets and purses of early 20th century Americans, at a time when 10 cents could buy you a newspaper, a cup of coffee, or even a movie ticket. Historically, this was an era when the U.S. was dealing with sweeping social changes. The dawn of the automobile age, the early influence of electricity in major cities, and the nation's slow preparation for World War I, even though it wouldn't officially enter the conflict until 1917. Economically, Americans were shifting from rural life to industrial city living, and coins like this dime passed constantly through factories, general stores, train stations, and old wooden cash registers. Numismatically, the 1914 Barber dime is loved by collectors because it represents the second-to-last chapter of the Barber dime series, which would end in 1916, just before the introduction of the Mercury dime. Most surviving examples show circulation where, because people used these coins heavily, so well-preserved versions, especially those with strong Liberty lettering still clear on the headband, are prized. Philadelphia coins, marked by having no mint mark, were the backbone of national coinage, making this 1914p simply the regular but historically important issue from the main minting facility. Collectors appreciate it for its understated classic design, its connection to Charles Barber's long tenure as the mint's engraver, and its snapshot of a moment in American life when the world was rapidly shifting but still holding onto a certain old-world charm. Today, a typical circulated 1914 Philadelphia Barber dime often exists as a worn but character-filled relic. Smooth surfaces, soft rims, gentle patina, while high-grade pieces shine with crisp detailing in Liberty's hair, wreath, and facial features, making them valuable to anyone building a full Barber set. Ultimately, a 1914 Barber dime isn't just a small silver disc. It's a quiet time traveler from an America on the edge of modernization. A country still using horse-drawn wagons and telegraphs, but already dreaming of airplanes, skyscrapers, and a dazzling industrial era. Owning or studying one feels like touching the heartbeat of 1914 itself. When a dime was real money, silver was still in everyday pockets, and the United States was about to step onto the world stage in a way it never had before.